Well, hi, everybody. Welcome once again, wherever you may be, to Unstoppable Mindset. I am your host, Mike Hingson. Sometimes I say Michael Hingson, and people have said, well, is it Mike or Michael? And the answer is it doesn't really matter. It took a master's degree in physics and 10 years in sales for me to realize that if I said Mike Hingson on the phone, people kept calling me Mr. Kingson, and I couldn't figure out why. So I started saying Michael Hingson, and they got the Hingson part right, but it doesn't matter to me. So anyway, Mike Hingson or Michael Hingson, glad you're with us wherever you are. And our guest today is Dan Swift, who has his own podcast. And it was actually through that podcast that we met, and I told him that I wouldn't do it with him and be on his podcast unless he would be on Unstoppable Mindset. And here he is. Dan is a person who writes music. He's an engineer. He does a lot of work with web design and so on, and we're going to get into all that. So, Dan, I want to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset, and we're really glad you're here.
Michael, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am super excited.
Well, looking forward to getting to spend more time with you. We did yours, time to discuss, and now we get this one. So it's always kind of fun. And Dan is in Pennsylvania, so we're talking across the continent, which is fine. It's amazing what we can do with electronics these days. Telling it's not like the good old days of the covered wagon. What can I say? So Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of the early Dan growing up and all that?
Oh, geez, how far back do you want me to go?
Oh, as far as you want to go.
Well, okay, so I am the youngest of five. Grew up just outside of Philadelphia. As being the youngest, there are certain perks that go along with that. I get to experience things that my parents would have previously said no to the older siblings, and you know how it is with if you have more than one kid, technically you get a little more relaxed as you have more. But then I also had the other benefit of hearing the expression, "There are young ears in the room." I will tell you later. So I kind of got some of that too. But I grew up outside of Philadelphia. Had a passion for music pretty early on. I was never good at any sports. Tried a number of things, and when I landed on music, I thought, this is something that I can do. I seem to have a natural talent for it. And I started. I tried playing the piano when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. That didn't pan out. Moved on to the trumpet when I was 9 or 10. Eventually ended up picking up guitar, bass guitar. Double bass, revisited piano later in life. But that's the musical side of things. Also, when I was young, I had a passion for role-playing games. Dungeons and Dragons was really big when I was a teenager. So I was super excited for that. Yeah, that's kind of those memories kind of forced me or kind of shaped me into the person that I am today. I'm very lighthearted, very easygoing, and I just try to enjoy life.
I played some computer games when computers came along, and I started fiddling with them. The games I usually played were text-based games. I've never really played Dungeons and Dragons and some of those, and I'm sure that there are accessible versions of some of that. But I remember playing games like Adventure. Do you remember? Have you heard of Adventure?
I have.
Yeah. So that was fun. Infocon they had Zork, which was really the same as Adventure, but they had a whole bunch of games, and those are fun. And I think all of those games, I know a lot of adults would probably say kids spend too much time on some of them, but some of these games, like the text-based games, I thought really were very good at expanding one's mind, and they made you think, which is really what was important to me.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too, because you'd be put in these situations where, you're trying to solve some kind of puzzle and you're trying to think, okay, well, that didn't work or that didn't work. And you try all these different things, and then you decide to leave and come back to it, and you realize later, like, you didn't have something that you needed to progress forward or something like that. But it really gets the brain going, trying to come up with these creative solutions to progress the game forward.
Yeah, and the creative people who made them in the first place, I don't know where they spent their whole time, that they had nothing to do but to create these games. But hey, it worked.
It sure did.
So, you do it. Well, so you went off to college. Where'd you go?
Sure, I went to a small liberal arts college, Lebanon Valley College in Pennsylvania. It's near Hershey. it was weird in that the entire school was about half the size of my entire high school. So
Mm.
that was very, very weird. And then you talk to these other people, and it's like my high school was very large by comparison, but for me it was like, well, it's high school. That's what I knew. But yeah, I went to Lebanon Valley College near Hershey. I studied. I was a double major. I studied music composition and music recording.
Okay. And I've got to go back and ask before we continue that. So, what were some of the real perks you got as a kid that your older siblings didn't get?
Oh, geez. Okay. Let me.
Couldn't resist.
Yeah, probably some of the more cliche things. I probably got to spend the night at a friend's house earlier than my oldest
Ah.
brother, for instance. I know my parents were a little more concerned about finances. So I know my oldest brother didn't get a chance to go away to college. He did community college instead. And then kind of my sister was a very similar thing. And then once we got like about halfway down, me and my two other brothers, we all had the opportunity to go away to college. So I think that was definitely one of the perks. If I was the oldest, I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity
Mm,
with my family.
got it. Well, so you went off and you got a bachelor's in music composition and music recording. So that brought you to what you were interested in part, which was the engineering aspect of it. But that certainly gave you a pretty well-rounded education. Why those two? Why composition and recording?
Sure. So if we talk about the music first, at that time, so this is like the late 90s, early 2000s, any kind of digital music that was out there really was MIDI based. And anyone that was around that time and paying attention, it was like these very like that Muzak kind of sound to
Mm,
it. So there wasn't a whole lot going on with MIDI, or I'm sorry, with music, as far as how great it sounded, or I shouldn't say how great it sounded. The instruments that are triggered by MIDI, they didn't sound all that great. But around that time, there was this game that came out, Final Fantasy VII, and I remember hearing the music for that, and it was all electronic, and it was just blown away by how fantastic it sounded. And around that time, I thought, it'd be really cool to get into writing music for video games. And that was something I really kind of toyed with. So that was kind of in the back of my head. But also at the time, I was in a band, like a rock band.
hmm
And I thought, I'm going to school. They have this opportunity to work as a music engineer, which is something I really wanted to do at the time. And I thought, free studio time, my band will be here. This will be awesome. And it wasn't until I got there that I discovered that they also had the music composition program. And it was I was only there maybe a week or two. And once I discovered that, I was like, well, this is going to be great. I'll learn to write music. I can write for video games. I have the engineering to go with it. This is going to be fantastic.
Speaking of electronic music, did you ever see a science fiction movie called The Forbidden Planet?
I did not.
Oh, it's music. It's not really music in the sense of what we call, but it's all electronic. You gotta find it. I'm sure you can find it somewhere. It's called The Forbidden Planet. Walter Pigeon is in it. But the music and the sounds fit the movie, although it's all electronic and electronic sounding. Pretty interesting.
Now, is that from, I know like in the 50s, 60s, there was a
Yeah,
lot of experiment. Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah. But again, it fit the movie, which was the important part. So it certainly wasn't music like John Williams today and in the 80s and all that. But again, for the movie, it fit very well, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out. I remember when I was in school, we talked about like that avant-garde kind of style of the 50s, 60s, and there was a lot of weird stuff going on with
Yeah.
electronic music. So I'm very curious to see to check this out. Yeah,
Yeah, you have to let me know what you find, what you think about it when you get to chance to watch it.
absolutely.
Or actually, I may have a copy. If I do, I'll put it in a Dropbox folder and send you a link.
Fantastic.
So you graduated. Now, when did you graduate?
Sure. So I graduated in 2003.
Okay. So you graduated, and then what did you do?
So um, backing up about maybe 12 months prior to that, I decided I didn't want to write music for video games. I also did not want to work in a recording studio. And the reason for this was for music, it was I didn't, it was more, it was something I really, really enjoyed. And I didn't want to be put in a position where I had to produce music on demand. I
Mm,
didn't want to do that. I didn't want to lose my hobby, lose my passion in that way. So I decided that was out. And then also when it came to working in a studio, if I wanted to be the engineer that I really wanted to be, I would have to be in a place where the music scene was really happening. So I would have to be in like Philadelphia or Los Angeles or Nashville or deep in Philly or something like that. And I do not like the cities. I don't feel comfortable in the city. So I was like, that's not really for me either. I mean, I could work in like a suburb studio, but I was like, not for me. I don't, not for me. So when I graduated college, I ended up doing freelance web work. I had met through a mutual friend. I was introduced by a mutual friend to a person that was looking for a new web designer developer. They lost their person and they were looking for someone to take over with that. And at the time, I had a little bit of experience doing that from when I was in high school. Kind of picked it up on the side, just kind of like as a hobby. And I was like, I'll give this a shot. So I started actually doing that freelance for a number of years after graduation. I also worked other jobs that was like kind of like nowhere, like dead end kind of jobs. I did customer service work for a little bit. I was a teacher with the American Cross for a little bit of this and that, just trying to find my way. But at the same time, I was doing freelance stuff and nothing related to music and nothing related to technology.
well, so you learned HTML coding and all that other stuff that goes along with all that, I gather.
I sure did. I sure did. And at the time, CSS was just kind of starting to gain
CSS was just starting.
popularity.
Yeah.
Yep. So that, and then I learned JavaScript a little bit, and I had a very healthy attitude when it came to accepting new clients and projects. I always tried to learn something new. Anytime someone gave me a new request came in, it was like, okay, well, I already know how to do this by doing it this way, but how can I make this better? And that was really the way that I really propelled myself forward in the digital, I should say, when it comes to development or design.
Okay. So you ended up really seriously going into website development and so on.
I did. So I continued doing freelance. And then about 5 years after I graduated, I started working as an audiovisual technician. And I also was doing computer tech stuff as part of the role as well. And while I was there, I ended up developing some web applications for myself to use that I could use to interact with our like projectors and stuff like that because they were all on the network, so I could interact with them using my wait for it iPod Touch.
There you go.
So that was, I kind of like started to blend those two together. I was really interested in the web at the time, because I was still doing the freelance. I really wanted to move forward and kind of find a full-time position doing that. So I ended up pursuing that more and just trying to refine those skills. And it wasn't until about 5 years later, I ended up working as a full-time web developer and then kind of moved forward from there.
iPod Touch, what memories. And there are probably bunches of people who don't even know what that is today.
That is so true. And at the time, that was cutting edge technology.
Yeah, it was not accessible, so I didn't get to own one because it was later than that Steve Jobs was finally kind of pushed with the threat of a lawsuit into making things accessible. And then they did make the iPhone, the iPod, the Mac, and so on, and iTunes U and other things like that accessible. And of course, what Steve Jobs did, what Apple did, which is what Microsoft eventually sort of has done as well, but he built accessibility into the operating system. So anybody who has an Apple device today actually has a device that can be made accessible by simply turning on the accessibility mode. Of course, if you're going to turn it on, you better learn how to use it because the gestures are different. But it took a while, but that did happen. But by that time, I had other things going on, and so I never did get an iPod, and wasn't able to make it work. But that's okay. But it's like the CD has gone away, and the iPod has gone away, and so many things, and DVDs have gone away.
Yeah, so true, so true. Just as soon as we start to get used to them, gone.
I think there is, well, maybe it's close. There was a Blockbuster open up in Oregon, But again, Blockbuster Video, another one, and I think somebody's trying to bring them back. But I do see that vinyl records are still being sold in various places by various people. Michael Bublé just put out a new album, The Best of Bublé, and it's available, among other things, in vinyl. So the old turntables, the old record players, and you can actually buy his album as a record and play it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, they've been very big with marketing too. It's been kind of a marketing, I don't want to say gimmick, but in that realm, you kind of like, hey, this is also available on vinyl. And you try to get the people that are like the audiophiles to really check it out. I never really took to vinyl personally, but I know plenty of people that have sworn by it.
Well, I've heard a number of people say that the audio actually is better on vinyl than typical MP3 or other similar file formats.
Yep, yep. I had a friend growing up, and actually, I shouldn't say growing up because I was already like in college or post college. But a buddy of mine, Craig, he was all about vinyl, and he had the nice the amplifier and the nice I think even like a certain kind of needle that you would get for the
Yeah,
record player, and you'd have to sit in the sweet spot to really enjoy it,
right.
and I respect that. But for me, it was like I didn't hear that much of a difference between a CD and vinyl. Now I really didn't have the opportunity to A/B test them, but now I will say, comparing a CD to like an MP3 file, for instance, even a high quality MP3 file, I can tell the difference on
Oh,
that. And
sure. Yeah.
I would never, I'd use the MP3s for convenience, but if I were to have it my way, man, I'd have that uncompressed audio, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Waveforms.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. Obviously that's going to give you the real quality. Of course, it takes a lot more memory, but nevertheless, if you've got the space, it really makes a lot of sense to do because MP3 isn't going to be nearly as high a level quality.
Absolutely, absolutely true. And the way I rationalize it to myself, it's like, well, if I'm going to be in the car or if I'm going to be walking around and listening to music, I'm going to be getting all kinds of sounds from outside anyway. It kind of offsets the poor quality of the MP3.
Yeah,
That's the
that's
way I
true.
justify it.
That's true. Well, when and MP3 is convenient if you want to put a bunch of stuff in on a memory card and be able to play it all. Because if you have uncompressed audio, it does take a lot more space and you can't put as much on a card, or you got to get a much bigger card. And now we're getting pretty good size memory cards, but still the reality is that for most purposes, not all, MP3 will suffice.
That is true. That is true. And I think too, you have the next battle is going to be MP3 or a streaming.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Boy, what a world. Well, so one of the things I noticed in reading your bio and so on is that you got involved to a great degree in dealing with accessibility on the web. Tell me about that.
Absolutely, Michael. So I have very strong opinions of accessibility, and this really comes back to, I was at my job, and I was only there as a full-time developer. I wasn't there all that long, maybe a year, maybe two. And my supervisor came over to me, and she said, we want to start to make things more accessible. And this is like 10, 12 years ago at this point. And I was like, oh, okay, and I did my little bit of research, and there wasn't a whole lot going on at the time. I don't even think WCAG was a thing back then. It may have been. I can't remember if 508 was a thing in the web
508
space or not.
was.
It was. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was doing my research, and you learn about the alt tags, and it's like, okay, well, we're doing that, okay. Then you learn about forums, and it's like, okay, well, they need to have labels, okay. But the turning point was this, Michael. We had a person on staff that was blind, and I was put in touch with this person, and I asked them to review like different web applications we made, or forums, or web pages. And the one day, I can't remember if he volunteered or if I asked, but essentially, the request was, can this person come into our physical space and review stuff for us in person? And that experience was life-changing for me. Just watching him navigate our different web pages or web applications or forms and seeing how he could go through it, see what was a problem, what was not a problem, was just an incredible experience. And I've said this before when given the opportunity to talk about this. Yeah, I say to other developers and designers, if you ever have even the slightest opportunity to interact with someone, if you meet someone and they are using, let me phrase that. If you have the opportunity to watch someone that is blind using and navigate through the web, take that opportunity. It's just an amazing experience, and you draw so much from it as a developer or a designer. So very strong opinions about it. I'm all about inclusivity and making things equal for everyone on the web, and that was just my introductory experience about a dozen years ago.
And so what have you done with it all since?
Sure. So with our website, we went from having about 1 million success criterion failures, and we've gotten it all the way down to, I think my last check, I think it was maybe about 10,000. So it was a huge change. It's hard to get everything because as content changes, as new pages come online, it's hard to keep everything 100% accessible. But we know what to look for. We're looking for the right contrast. We're looking for, the alt tags. We're looking for hierarchy with the headers. We're making sure our forms are accessible. We're making sure there aren't any keyboard traps. Things that most web visitors don't even think about, or developers even think about until, you need to think about them.
Well, and other things as well, such as with other kinds of disabilities. If you're a person with epilepsy, for example, you don't want to go to a website and find blinking elements, or at least you need to have a way to turn them off.
Yeah, and, or audio that starts automatically, or videos that start automatically.
Yeah, so many different things. Or video that starts automatically and there's music, but there's no audio, so a blind person doesn't even know what the video is.
Yes.
Which happens all too often. But the reality is that with the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's been interesting because some lawyers have tried to fight the courts and say, well, but the ADA came out long before the internet, so we didn't know anything about the internet, so it doesn't apply. And finally, the Department of Justice is taking some stands to say, yes, it does, because the internet is a place of business. But it's going to have to be codified, I think, to really bring it home. But some courts have sided with that argument and said, well, yeah, the ADA is too old, so it doesn't matter. And so we still see so many challenges with the whole idea of access. And people listening to this podcast know that, among other things, I work with a company called Accessiby. Are you familiar with them?
I am. Yep.
Yeah. And so that's been an interesting challenge. But what makes Accessiby interesting is that because it has an artificial intelligent widget that can monitor a website, and at the low end of costs, it's like $490 a year, and it may not pick up everything that a body needs, but it will do a lot. And going back to what you said earlier, as websites change, as they evolve, because people are doing things on their website, which they should be doing. If you've got a static website and you never do anything with it, that's not going to do you very much good. But if it's changing constantly, the widget at least can look at it and make a lot of the changes to keep the website accessible. The other part of it is that it can tell you what it can't do, which is cool.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. There's a lot of tools that are out there. They do monitor the stuff for you. Like we have on our site, we have something that runs every night and it gives us a report every day. But then there are things that it doesn't always check, or it might get a false positive because it sees that, like, this element has a particular color background and the text is a particular color as well, but there's maybe a gradient image that lies between them, or an image that lies between them, so it's actually okay even though the tool says it's not, or something like that. So you have those automated tools, but you got to also look at it. A human has to look at those as well.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but the thing that I think is important with, let's say, use Accessiby as an example, is that I think every web developer should use Accessiby. And the reason I think that is not that Accessiby will necessarily do a perfect job with the Access widget, but what it will do is give you something that is constantly monitored, and even if it only makes about 50% of the website more usable because there are complex graphics and other things that it can't do, the reality is, why work harder than you have to? And if Accessibility can do a lot of the work for you without you having to do it, it doesn't mean that you need to charge less or you need to do things any different, other than the fact that you save a lot of time on doing part of it because the widget does it for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a really, really good point too. Having that tool, that tool in your tool belt,
Yeah, yeah, and it makes a lot of sense to do. And there are people who complain about products like Accessibility saying artificial intelligence can't do it, it's too new. You got to start somewhere. And the reality is that Accessibility in of itself does a lot, and it really makes websites a lot better than they otherwise were. And some people say, well, we've gone to websites and Accessibility doesn't really seem to make a difference on the site. Maybe not, but even if your website is pretty good up front and you use Accessibility, it's that time that you change something that you don't notice and suddenly Accessibility fixes it, that it makes it better. It's an interesting discussion all the way around, but to deny the reality of what an AI oriented system can do is really just putting your head in the sand and not really being realistic about life as we go forward, I think.
That is so true. That is so true. And there's so many implications with AI and where it's going to go and what it will be able to do. It's just in its infancy, and the amount of things that the possibilities of what the future is going to be like, where they're just going to be very, very interesting.
I interviewed someone. Well, I can't say interview because it's a conversation. But I had a conversation with someone earlier on Unstoppable Mindset, and he said something very interesting. He's a coach, and specifically, he does a lot of work with AI. And he had one customer that he really encouraged to start using ChatGPT. And what this customer did, he called his senior staff into a meeting one day and he said, okay, I want you to take the rest of the day and just work with ChatGPT and create ideas that will enhance our business. And then let's get together tomorrow to discuss them. And he did that because he wanted people to realize the value already that exists using some of this technology. Well, these people came back with incredible ideas because they took the time to focus on them. And again, they interacted with ChatGPT. So it was symbiotic is probably the wrong word, but synergistic kind of a relationship where they and the AI system worked together and created apparently what became really clever ideas that enhanced this customer's business. And the guy, when he first started working with this coach, was totally down on AI. But after that day of interaction with his staff, he recognized the value of it. And I think the really important key of AI is AI will not replace anyone. And that's what this gentleman said to me. He said, AI won't do it. People may replace other people, which really means they're not using AI properly, because if they were, when they find that they can use artificial intelligence to do the job that someone else is doing, you don't get rid of that person. You find something else for them to do. And the conversation that we had was about truck drivers who are involved in transporting freight from one place to another. If you get to the point where you have an autonomous vehicle who can really do that, you still keep a driver behind the wheel, but that driver is now doing other things for the company while the AI system does the driving once it gets dependable enough to do that. So he said there's no reason for AI to eliminate, and it won't, it's people that do it, eliminate any job at all, which I think is a very clever and appropriate response.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. You think of other technologies that are out there and how it disrupted different industries. And the one example I like to use is the traffic light. And I wonder, and I've no way of knowing this because I haven't researched this at all, but I wonder if there was any kind of pushback when they started putting in traffic lights, because at that point in time, maybe you didn't have people directing traffic or something like that. Or maybe that was the event of the stop sign. It took away the jobs of people that were directing traffic or something like that. Maybe there was some kind of uproar over that. Maybe not. I don't know. But I like to think that things like that, it disrupts the industry, but then people move on and there are other opportunities for them, and it progresses, it makes society progress forward.
And one would note that we still do use school crossing guards at a lot of schools.
That is so true. That is true. Yeah. Yeah. And essentially too, like talking about idea generation, I was talking to to Ginger. I forgot her last name, but she's the president of Pinstripe Marketing, and she was saying that her team sometimes does the same thing, that they use ChatGPT for idea generation. And I think um, uh, I want to say Ashley. I think Ashley Mason, I think was her name, from Dash to Social. The same thing. They use ChatGPT for idea generation, not necessarily for creating the content, but
Hmm.
for idea generation. And the ideas it comes up with, it can save you a lot of time.
Well, it can. And I've heard over the last year plus how a lot of school teachers are very concerned that kids will just go off and get ChatGPT to write their papers. And every time I started hearing that, I made the comment, why not let it do that? You're not thinking about it in the right way. If a kid goes off and just uses ChatGPT to write their paper, they do that and they turn it into you. The question is then, what are you as the teacher going to do? And I submit that what the teachers ought to do is when they assign a paper and the class all turns in their papers, then what you do is you take one period and you give each student a minute to come up and defend without having the paper in front of them, their paper. You'll find out very quickly who knows what. And I think it's a potentially great teaching tool.
That is fascinating. That perspective is awesome. I love that. And
Well, it makes sense. Yeah, go
it
ahead.
certainly does. It certainly does. And that made me think of this too. There's a lot of pushback from artists about how that their art was being used, or art is being used by AI to generate new art essentially. And musicians are saying the same thing, that they're taking
Hmm.
our stuff, it's getting fed into ChatGPT or whatever, and they're using it to train these different models. And I read this article. I don't even know where it was, but it's probably a couple months ago at this point. And the person made this comparison, and the person said, it's really no different than a person learning how to paint in school by studying other people's art. It's the same idea. It's just at a much, much accelerated pace. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. It's an interesting perspective.
It is. I do agree that we need to be concerned that the human element is important, and there are a lot of things that people are doing already to misuse some of this AI stuff, these AI tools. But we already have the dark web. We've had that for a while too. I've never been to the dark web. I don't know how to get to it. That's fine. I don't need to go to the dark web. Besides that, I'll bet it's not accessible anyway. But the we've had the dark web, and people have accepted the fact that it's there, and there are people who monitor it and all that. But the reality is, people are going to misuse things. There are going to be people who will misuse, and yeah, we have to be clever enough to try to ferret that out. But the fact of the matter is, AI offers so much already. One of the things that I heard, oh gosh, I don't know whether it was this year or late last year, was that using artificial intelligence, um, Pfizer and other organizations actually created in only a couple of days, or Moderna, I guess, is the other one, the COVID vaccines that we have. If people had to do it alone, it would have taken them years that we didn't have. And the reality is that using artificial intelligence, it was only a few days and they had the beginnings of those solutions because they created a really neat application and put the system to work. Why wouldn't we want to do that?
I completely agree. I completely agree. And that's how you move society forward. It's similar to the idea of, testing medicine on, testing medications on animals, for instance. I love animals. I love dogs, bunnies. I mean, the whole gamut. Love
Mm-hmm.
animals. But I understand the importance of, well, do we test on them or do we test on people? You gotta, or do you not test, or do you just not? You gotta weigh out the pros and cons, and they're definitely those with AI as well.
Well, I agree, and with animals and people now, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we ought to be doing tests on politicians. They're not people anyway. So I think when you decide to become a politician, you take a special pill that nobody seems to be able to prove, but they take dumb pills, so they're all there. But anyway, I'm with Mark Twain. Congress is that grand old benevolent asylum for the helpless. So, it's I'm an equal opportunity abuser, which is why we don't do politics on Unstoppable Mindset. Although we could have a lot of fun with it, I'm sure, but
We sure could.
it would be great. Talk about artificial intelligence. You got politicians, but the reality is that it's really something that brings so much opportunity, and it's going to continue to do that. And every day, as we see advances in what AI is doing, we will continue to see advances in what is open for us to be able to utilize it to accomplish, which is cool.
I completely agree. Completely agree.
Yeah, so it'll be fun to see, kind of how it goes. So do you work for a company now that makes websites, or what does your company that you work for do?
Sure. So I'm still in the education space. So I'm still I'm like in a state school, managing a team of web professionals.
Okay. Well, that's cool. So you keep the school sites and all the things that go along with it up and
That is
running and
correct.
all. Mm-hmm.
That is correct. And we have lots of fun challenges when we start to integrate with third parties, and got to make sure they're accessible too. And sometimes there's dialogue that goes back and forth that people aren't happy with, but it's my job to make sure that's one of the things that we make sure happens, especially since I'm sure you've been following this. There's the Department of Justice ruling back in April that I think it's anyone that's receiving state funding, they have to follow the WCAG 2.1 AA compliance by
Right.
April of 26 if you are a certain size. And my institution falls in that category. So we need to make sure that we're on the right path.
Well, and the reality is that has been around since 2010, but it took the
Yep.
DOJ 12 years to finally come up with rules and regulations to implement Section 508.
Yep.
But it's high time they did, and they do need to do it for the rest of the internet, and it's coming, but people are just being slow. And for me personally, I think it's just amazing that it's taking so long. It's not like you have to redesign a box, that you have to go off and retool hardware. This is all code. Why should it be that difficult to do? But people throw roadblocks in your way, and so it becomes tough.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I remember reading this article. Oh gosh, this is probably about a dozen years ago, and it said that the original web was 100% accessible. That it was just just text on a page pretty much, and you
Right.
could do very very simple layouts. And then it got more convoluted. People would start doing tables for layouts and tables within tables within tables and so on and so forth.
And
But the
pictures and
original
everything
web,
else, yeah.
it was completely accessible. And now with all the interactions we do with client side scripting and everything like that, it's a mess.
If you really want to hear an interesting thing, I like to look, and I've done it for a long time, long before Accessibility. I like to explore different sites and see how accessible they are. And one day I visited NSA.gov, the National Security Agency, which of course doesn't really exist. So I could tell you stories. But I went to NSA.gov, and I found that was the most accessible website I had ever encountered. If you arrow down to a picture, for example, when you arrowed into it, suddenly you got on your screen reader a complete verbal description of what the picture was. And everything about that site was totally usable and totally accessible. I'd never seen a website that was so good. Contrast that with, and it's changed, I want to be upfront about it, Martha Stewart Living. The first time I went to that website, because I was selling products that Martha Stewart was interested in, so I went to look at the website. It was totally inaccessible. The screen reader wouldn't talk at all. Now, I've been to Martha Stewart since, and it's much more accessible. But I was just amazed that NSA.gov was so accessible. It was amazing, which I thought was really pretty cool, of all places.
It's interesting. Before I started my YouTube channel and podcast, I actually thought about creating a channel and or podcast about websites that are inaccessible. And I thought about calling companies out. And the more I thought about it, I was like, I don't know if I want to make that many people angry. I don't know if that's a good idea.
I would suggest going the other way, and maybe we can work together on it. But I would rather feature websites that are accessible and tell the story of how they got there, how their people got there. I would think that would be, I hear what you're saying about making people angry. So I would think rather than doing that, feature the the places that are, and why they are, and their stories, and that might help motivate more people to make their websites accessible. What do you think about that as an idea?
I actually thought about that as well, and I was going back and forth between that and the other the negative side because I thought bring that to light might actually force them to like by shedding light on it, it might force them to make their site more accessible. Whether it would or not, I don't know. But I definitely thought about those two sides.
Yeah, it's a challenge all the way around. Well, what was the very first thing you did, the first experience that you ever had dealing with accessibility that got you started down that road?
I think it was like I said when I worked with that blind person. When I first had that opportunity to see how he used the different web
Mm,
applications we had, the different web
okay.
pages, and he was using a Mac, so he was using VoiceOver.
Yep.
He was using I think it's called the Rotor menu or Roto, something like that.
Rotor. Yeah.
Yep. And then after that happened, it was like, whoa, I need to get a Mac so I can like learn to use this as well and do my own testing. So the IT department had an old Mac. I asked them, I said, hey guys, do you have any old MacBooks that I can use? I was like, it can be old. I just need to test it. I need it to test for accessibility on the web.
Got a
And
plan.
they hooked me up with an old machine. It wasn't super old, but it worked for me. It gave me an opportunity to do my testing. And then I kind of became like the person in the department to do that. Everyone else, they didn't have the interest as much as I did. They recognized the importance of it, but they didn't have the same fire on the inside that I
Hmm.
had. So I kind of took that on. And then like that, now that I'm in the position of leadership, now it's more of a delegating that and making sure it still gets done. But I'm kind of like the resident expert in our area, so I'm still kind of the person that dives in a little bit, but I try to make my team aware and do the things they need to do to make sure we're continuing to create accessible projects.
You mentioned earlier about the whole idea of third-party products and so on, and dealing with them. What do you do, and how do you deal with a company? Let's say you need to use somebody else's product and some of the things that the school system has to do, and you find they're not accessible. What do you do?
So a lot of times what will happen, I shouldn't say a lot of times, it's not uncommon for a department to make a purchase from a third party. And this is strictly, I'm talking in the web space.
Right.
They might make a purchase with a third party, and then they want us to integrate it. And this is a great example I had. It was actually in the spring. They had essentially a widget that would be on their particular set of pages, and there was a pop-up that would appear. And don't get me started on pop-ups because I have a very strong opinion about
Yeah,
those.
me too.
Like I said, growing up, late 90s, early 2000s, very, very strong opinions about pop-ups. So, but I encountered this and it wasn't accessible. And I'm glad that in the position I'm in, I could say, you need to talk to the company and they need to fix this or I'm taking it down. And I'm glad that I had the backing from, from leadership essentially that I can make that claim and then do that. And the company ended up fixing it. So that was good. Another example was another department was getting ready to buy something. Actually, no, they had already purchased it, but they hadn't implemented it yet. The first example, that was already implemented. I discovered that after the fact. So in this second example, they were getting ready to implement it, and they showed us another school that used it, also a pop-up. And I looked at it on the other school site, and I said, "This isn't accessible. We cannot use this." No. And they said, "Well, yes, it is." And I said, "No, it isn't." And I explained to them, and I showed them how it was not accessible. And they ended up taking it back to their developers. Apparently, there was a bug that they then fixed, and they made it accessible, and then we could implement it. So it's nice that like that I have the support from leadership that if there is something that is inaccessible, I have the power to kind of wield my fist and take that down, take it off of our site.
Do you ever find that when some of this comes up within the school system, that departments push back, or have they caught on and recognized the value of accessibility so they'll be supportive?
I think the frustration with them becomes more of we bought this tool. We wish we had known this was an issue before we bought. I think it's more of a like that. We just wasted our time and money, possibly. But generally speaking, they do see the value of it and they recognize the importance of it. It's just more of a well, now there's more hoops everyone has to go through.
Yeah, and as you mentioned with pop-ups especially, it's a real challenge because you could be on a website and a lot of times a pop-up will come up and it messes up the website for people with screen readers and so on. And part of the problem is we don't even always find the place to close or take down the pop-up, which is really very frustrating.
Exactly, exactly. The tab index could be off, or you could still be on the page somewhere and it doesn't allow you to get into it and remove it, or
Yeah.
and extra bonus points if they also have an audio playing or a video playing inside of that pop-up.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does make life a big challenge, which is very, very frustrating all the way around. Yeah, pop-ups are definitely a big pain in the butt. And I know with Accessibility, we're all very concerned about that, but still pop-ups do occur. And um, the neat thing about a product like Accessibility, and one of the reasons I really support it, is it's scalable. And that is that as the people who develop the product at Accessibility improve it, those improvements filter down to everybody using the widget, which is really cool. And that's important because with individual websites where somebody has to code it in and keep monitoring it, as you pointed out, the problem is if that's all you have, then you've got to keep paying people to monitor everything, to make sure everything stays accessible and coded properly. Whereas there are ways to be able to take advantage of something like Accessibility, where what you're able to do is let it monitor it. And as Accessibility learns, and I've got some great examples where people contacted me because they had things like a shopping cart on a website that didn't work. But when Accessibility fixed it, because it turns out there was something that needed to be addressed, that got fixed for anybody using the product, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's really neat. I definitely appreciate things like that, where you essentially fix something for one person and it's fixed for everyone, or a new feature gets added for someone, or a group of people, for instance, and then everyone is able to benefit from that. That's really, really awesome. I love that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really so cool. So how is all this business with accessibility and so on affected you in terms of your YouTube channel and podcasting and so on? How do you bring that into the process?
That's really, really good question. I am very proud to say that I take the time to create transcripts of all my recordings, and then I go through them and I check them for accuracy to make sure that things aren't correct. Things aren't correct. Make sure things are correct, that they are not incorrect.
Yeah,
So I'll make sure that those are there when the videos go live. Those are available. Spotify creates them automatically for you. I don't know that I have the ability to modify them. I'm assuming I probably do, but honestly, I haven't checked into that. But so that's all accessible. When it comes to my webpage, I make sure that all my images have the appropriate, alt tags associated with them, that the descriptions are there so people understand what the pictures are. I don't have a whole lot of pictures. Usually it's just the thumbnail for the videos.
yeah,
So just indicating what it is. And then I just try to be, kind of text heavy. I try to make sure that my links are not, click here, learn more, stuff like that. I make sure, or they're not actual web addresses. I try to make sure that they're actual actionable. So when someone's using a screen reader and they go over a link, it actually is meaningful.
yeah,
And color contrast is another big one. I try to make sure my color contrast is, meeting the appropriate level for WCAG 2.1 AA, which I can't remember what the actual contrast is, but there's a contrast checker for it, which is really,
yeah.
really helpful.
Well, and the other part about it is when somebody goes to your website, again, of course, accessibility is different for different people. So when you're dealing with things like contrast or whatever, do people who come to the website have the ability to monitor or not monitor, but modify some of those settings so that they get maybe a higher contrast or change colors, or do they have that ability?
They do not have that ability. I remember looking into a tool a while ago, and actually, at the school, we thought about developing a tool. It would be like a widget on the side that you could adjust different things like that. You could do, you could remove images, you could remove animation, you could change color, contrast, that sort of thing, and it'd just be like a very predefined kind of settings. But in my research, I found that a lot of times that causes other problems for people. And it kind of falls into the arena of separate but equal. And there's a lot of issues with that right now in the accessibility space when it comes to the web. So for instance, there was a company, I forget what the company name was, but they had one of their things that they did was they would create text-only versions of your pages. So you'd contract with them. They would scrape the content of your site. They would create a text-only version of your pages. So if someone was using a screen reader, they could just follow that link and then browse the text-only version. And there was litigation, and the company got sued, and the person suing was successful because it was essentially creating a separate but equal environment.
And it's not necessarily separate but equal is the problem, because if you only got the text, pictures are put on websites, graphs are put on websites, all of those other kinds of materials are put on websites for reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so what really needs to happen is that those other things need to be made accessible, which is doable. And the whole web content accessibility guidelines do offer the information as to how to do that and what to do. But it is important that that other information be made available, because otherwise it really is separate but not totally equal at all.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Yeah.
So it is something to look at. Well, you've been doing a podcast and so on for a while. What are some challenges that someone might face that you would advise people about if they're going to create their own podcast or a really productive YouTube channel?
Be real with yourself with the amount of time you have to dedicate to it. Because what I found is that it takes a lot more time than I originally anticipated. I thought going in, so I typically try to record one or two people a week. When I first started out, I was only recording one person. And usually I would do, record one day, edit the next day, do the webpage stuff that would go with it. I can knock it out in like an hour or two. But I wasn't anticipating the social media stuff that goes with it, the search engine optimization that goes with it, the research that goes with it. So if I'm producing a video that's going to go on YouTube, what's hot at the moment? What are people actually searching for? What's going to grab people's attention? What kind of thumbnail do I have to create to grab someone's attention where it's not clickbait, but it also represents what I'm actually talking to the person about and still interesting. So it's a lot of that research, a lot of that sort of thing. It just eats up a lot of time. When it comes to like the transcripts, for instance, that was super easy. There are a number of services out there that create it automatically for you, and then you just have to read through it and make sure it's okay. I know YouTube will do it as well. I found that YouTube isn't as good as some of the other services that are out there, but in a bind, you can at least rely on YouTube and then go and edit from that point. But yeah, time is definitely a big one. I would say if anyone is starting to do it, make sure you have some serious time to dedicate, several hours a week. I would say upwards, probably a good, 4 to 10 hours a week is what I would estimate in the moment. If you're looking to produce a 30-minute segment once or twice a week, I would estimate about that time.
Yeah. One of the things I've been hearing about videos is that the trend is clearly not to have long videos, but only 30-second videos and put them vertical as opposed to horizontal. And anything over 30 seconds is not good, which seems to me to really not challenge people to deal with having enough content to make something relevant, because you can't do everything in 30 seconds.
Exactly. And what I found too, so this was a little bit of a learning curve for me. So with the YouTube shorts that you have, they have to be a minute or less. I mean, now they're actually in the process of changing it to 3 minutes or less. I do not have that access yet, but it has to be a minute or less.
I can buy that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, but what I'm finding, Michael, is that the people so I might create, this is a great example. So I was interviewing a comedian in New York City, Meredith Dietz. Awesome episode. But I was talking to her about becoming a comedian, and I made it about 4 different shorts for her from her video, and I was doing a new one each week to kind of promote it. And the videos, for me, they were getting a lot. I was getting anywhere between maybe 300 and 1,500 views on the short. For me, that was awesome. Yeah. For other people, that might be nothing. But for me, that was awesome. But what I found was that the people that watch the shorts aren't necessarily the same people that watch the long form videos.
Yeah.
So I might get subscribers from people that watch the shorts, but then they're not actually watching the video. And in the end, that kind of hurts your channel, because it's telling the YouTube, I'm going to use air quotes, the YouTube algorithm, that my subscribers aren't interested in my content, and it ends up hurting me more. So anyone that's trying to play that game, be aware of that. You can get more subscribers through shorts, but if you're not converting them, it's going to hurt you.
I can accept 3 minutes, but 30 seconds just seems to be really strange. And I was asked once to produce a demonstration of accessibility on a website. And they said, you got to do it in 30 seconds or no more than a minute, but preferably 30 seconds. Well, you can't do that if in part you're also trying to explain what a screen reader is and everything else. The reality is there's got to be some tolerance. And I think that the potential is there to do that. But it isn't all about eyesight, which is, of course, the real issue from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. And I think what YouTube is trying to do, and I believe they're getting this from TikTok. I think TikTok has up to 3 minutes. Actually,
Yeah.
it might be 10 minutes now that I think about it. But I think they're trying to follow the trend. And it's like, well, let's make videos slightly longer and see how that goes. So I'd be very curious to see how that all pans out.
Well, and I think that makes sense. I think there's some value in that. But 30 seconds is not enough time to get real content. And if people dumb down to that point, then that's pretty scary. So I'm glad to hear that the trend seems to be going a little bit longer, which is a good thing, which is pretty important to be able to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because like that, the trend right now, it's, people, they want stuff immediately. And if you don't catch them in 10 seconds, they're swiping onto something else, which is very challenging, at least, especially for me and what I do.
Who's the most inspiring guest that you've ever had on your podcast?
Oh, Michael, this is a good one. This is a good one. So, the video for Ashley Mason, she is a social media marketing. She created a social media marketing agency. Her video dropped several. Oh, it was on October 13th. It dropped. And her story was just incredible. She started a blog when she was 15 in high school. 4 years later, she's in college. Starts her own social media marketing agency. She starts this business while she's in college. And I think she said it was her second year of college. Her mom is diagnosed with terminal brain cancer at the same time. She's in college. She's trying to run this business. She's serving the role as a caretaker. And then, life marches on and she ends up moving forward with this business. And with the attitude, that, life is short and you gotta take life by the horns and just kind of like move forward and do your thing and just do what you got to do. So her story was so inspiring, and I remember talking to her about it and just amazing. And I'm thinking like, man, you've done so much more than I feel like I've done. And
Well,
she's like in her mid-20s, I think.
well, I won't complain that you didn't say it was me, but that's okay.
Well, I didn't want to spoil it because yours hasn't dropped yet.
Oh, that's a good point. No, that's fine. Tell me, with all the music knowledge and everything you have, what kind of challenges do musicians face today in 2024? I'm sure that's a question that has an answer that's evolved over time.
Yeah, so I think today in 2024, I think it's a double-edged sword. I think one of the really great things is that a lot of musicians, a lot of singer-songwriters and music artists, a lot of us are on the same playing field. I can have a hit just as well as the next person. However, that being said, there are so many people out there. There's so many other fish in this music world, that it's hard to get noticed. Whereas before, and I wasn't around in the 60s, but I'm guessing, you had bands that were playing and you had talent scouts. And if they liked a band, then they would approach them and they would take them into the industry, and the executives would decide what they were going to do. They'd listen to the demo tape or something like that. Whereas now it's like, I can create my own demo tape and it can sound halfway decent. So can the person in the house next door, So instead of competing with, maybe 5,000 other musicians, I'm competing with, millions of musicians. So we're on the same level playing field, which is awesome. We all have this gear, which makes things sound great, but there are so many of us, it's harder to get noticed.
It's hard, yeah. I'm a big fan of big band swing music and so on. Of course, when I think about who are the major clarinetists from the 30s and 40s and so on, you think of Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw as the two that most people have heard about. And yeah, you don't see the same level or content number of people that we see today. So it's perfectly understandable. On the other hand, I guess what that means is that if somebody really shines through today amongst all those people, then they must be good.
Or have a really good business manager.
Or have a really good business manager. Yeah, that's true. That is absolutely Makes sense. So,
Michael, it's interesting. Real quick, you talk about the big band music, and that made me think of this. Remember you'll remember that I said that when I first started really playing music, I played trumpet,
mhm,
and I used to love playing show tunes. 'Cause I was in like the pit orchestra band when I was in high school, and any bands, yeah, any musicals that were set in that era, like 42nd Street, for
yeah,
instance. The music was phenomenal. I loved playing that because it's so much fun to play that style. That the music of that time was just so fun to play. It was just wonderful.
yeah. Um, and it still is. And the music from back then, when I compare it to a lot of the Broadway plays today, I don't hear people singing songs from any of the more modern shows or most of the modern shows like we had with 42nd Street, Oklahoma, The Music Man, or any of those. We don't tend to get, as I like to call it, good toe tapping music like we did back then, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now I'm definitely out of my element because I haven't listened to show tunes in like 20 years. But yes, back when I was playing those, I mean, it's just some of that music. It just had a nice groove to it. It was like has a that big band jazzy kind of vibe. It was so wonderful to play, so
Yeah.
wonderful and listen to.
And listen to. Well, let me ask you this kind of as a sort of a final question. You've been doing this podcast for a while and you've had exposure to a lot of people. What's some advice you would give people based on all that you've heard and experienced and dealt with on the podcast?
Oh wow, that's a really good question. So yeah, so I started in January of 24. As of today, I've dropped 65 episodes. I have spoken to over 105 people and recorded 105 people at this point. And one of the really great pieces of advice that someone shared was, if you have a passion, just go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Find the thing that lights you up on the inside and go for it. If you're, and I remember hearing this next one when it comes to writers. If you want to be a writer, just start writing. Don't wait for tomorrow. Just start doing it. And that seems to be advice that comes down over and over again. If there's something you want to do, just start to take the steps and just start doing it. You don't necessarily have to, and that's one of the cool things, like talking to these real people in these real jobs, is that you might not necessarily need to have a specific degree to do something. You just need the ambition. Like again, when I was talking to Ginger, I mentioned her earlier, and she talked about, if you're trying to break into like a marketing industry, try to see if you can join as an intern. Even if you're there later in life, try to go down that avenue. There are other ways to get involved with other organizations rather than going back to school and getting a second degree or a third degree or a first degree. You don't always need it. And I think that's really cool. I think that's some of the greatest things that I've heard. And then some things I've been trying to do too is take advantage of what I'm hearing and group these episodes together. So, for instance, on my YouTube channel, I have playlists set up, and one of these playlists is like a no degree playlist. So, if someone they don't want to go to college, or for whatever reason they can't get into college or whatever, they can check out this playlist and see, well, what jobs are available to me that I can still have a career, a very successful and meaningful career without having a college degree. So I try to set up a number of these. I think I have about 12 different playlists at this point. It's just trying to help as many people as I can. But like that, the inspiring stuff is just, each person has their own story, and they're all wonderful stories. And, I definitely encourage people to just check it out. Find a person that you think might resonate with you and just give them a shot. Great stories.
Well, the reason I really love Unstoppable Mindset is because I get to chat with so many people. I learn a lot. And as I tell people, if I'm not learning at least as much as anybody else, then I'm not doing my job. But I do think that the whole idea is that people listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube hopefully will recognize they can be more unstoppable than they think they are. The reality is we just need to, in our own minds, make the commitment and go for it. And you're absolutely right with that. Well, I want to thank you for being here with us. This has been a lot of fun. Maybe we need to do another one, but this has been a lot of fun. If people want to reach out to you, how would they do that?
Sure. So I have two websites, timewediscuss.com. That's the home for all of my podcast stuff. So there are links there for the podcast, the different platforms, Apple, Spotify, so on and so forth. There's also a link for YouTube there as well. All my social media information is there at the bottom of the page as well. It's inside the footer. If you're interested in hearing some really, really great music, go to danswift.com. I have links there to purchase music as well as stream on all of the popular streaming platforms. I recommend starting there. There are several Dan Swifts out there. So while no disrespect to any of them, my music is substantially different. So if you want to hear what I've written, your best bet is to start at danswift.com to check out my music.
Well, I haven't mentioned it yet and should have earlier, but I mentioned to Dan at the very beginning, his latest album is called Parallels, and it dropped on February 29th of this year. And just this morning, before talking to Dan, I told my lovely little Echo device to play Parallels by Dan Swift, and it did, which was cool. So I really thank you for having it available, and I get to stream it.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have it, and I'm just glad people will enjoy it.
Well, I hope everyone will. I hope people reach out to you, and we, as I mentioned, we'll put your album covers in our show notes, which is really great. So send them over. But I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank all of you for listening to us today and being with us. We would really appreciate you giving us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening to or experiencing the podcast. Please give us a 5-star rating, and we love your feedback. Please pass it on. If you know of anyone who ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, Dan, you as well, please feel free to introduce us. Let us know who they are. We're always looking for more people to show everyone that they can be more unstoppable than they think. But please introduce us to guests at any time. So again, Dan, I want to thank you for being here. This has been absolutely fun, and I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, Michael. It's been a pleasure being here. Thanks for inviting me.